Look at this map. Hidden at the end of a secluded Scottish loch is a secretive military base, home to the UK's fleet of nuclear submarines. That base is Faslane.
But why are there nukes here? And does their presence make the UK safer, or Scotland a target?
Have you ever heard of MAD? It's a Cold War-era doctrine which means mutually assured destruction. Essentially, if one nuclear power launched a full-scale nuclear attack, the subsequent counterstrike would ensure the annihilation of both the attacker and the defender. I'm recording this from Glasgow in March 2026, and while no one is using nuclear weapons, right now we have war in Europe, the Middle East, multiple civil wars in Africa and Asia. They're all increasing global instability. And you might not expect it, but Scotland has a role to play in all of this. To understand what that is, I'm going 25 miles that way. At the tip of Gair Loch is His Majesty's Naval Base Clyde. Nobody calls it that though. It's known simply as Faslane. This base is home to the UK's fleet of 4 Vanguard-class submarines, each armed with Trident nuclear missiles. This quiet stretch of water on Scotland's west coast is one of the most strategically important military locations in Europe. Quick explainer. The UK has 4 Trident submarines. At any one time, there is one submarine carrying nuclear weapons patrolling the seas undetected, one undergoing maintenance, and 2 in port or on training manoeuvres. The submarines are 150 metres long. That's larger than 2 Airbus A380s, and they have a missile range of 4,000 nautical miles. The whole idea is that in the event of a nuclear attack on the UK, the submarine at sea has the ability to retaliate. To understand why our subs are in Scotland, we need to go back in time, and we need an expert.
Faslane is around 40 kilometres northwest of Glasgow, and the submarines are based there for a combination of reasons, including the deep water access to the North Atlantic, the fact that it is a geographically isolated space away from major population centres that can be more easily protected.
Dr. Timothy Peacock is a lecturer and historian at the University of Glasgow, specialising in war studies. That includes nuclear history.
Faslane is originally constructed as a World War II emergency port, and subsequently is converted into becoming the home of the United Kingdom's nuclear submarine fleet in the 1960s. And that is both the nuclear-powered submarines that are designed with conventional weapons such as torpedoes, designed to go on patrol and to hunt Soviet submarines or conduct other tasks in terms of naval operations, as well as the ballistic missile submarines that carry nuclear-armed missiles to act as the seaborne leg of any deterrent.
Historically, not everyone in Scotland has been happy with the presence of submarines, nor the idea of a nuclear deterrent being housed here.
The demonstrators had expected the heavily guarded convoy to take the steep incline at Peaton Hill, a shortcut between Coulport and the Clyde submarine base. But at the last minute the route was switched. The tactic took most of the demonstrators by surprise and left many of them screaming, shouting and crying in anger.
These views are shared by the protesters of the Faslane Peace Camp, the longest-running occupied peace camp in the world, who, in 2022, celebrated 40 years of encampment beside the submarine base.
There have been arguments as to those on one side suggesting that the presence of a nuclear deterrent has prevented wider war and has allowed for de-escalation and diplomacy, as opposed to other scholars who've argued that the very presence of nuclear weapons has potentially exacerbated the possibilities of conflict, including through arms races and the encouraging of the building up of nuclear armaments or larger conventional forces by multiple sides. I think I would say that I am observantly concerned about the present global situation. I think that understandably, right now people will be, in a number of cases, worrying about the future for completely understandable reasons. At the same time, I believe that, especially when I look at the capacity of what people are able to achieve in terms of resolution or in terms of resilience in the most difficult of circumstances, it is something that continues to give me hope. Because ultimately, the single biggest challenge is not one of technologies or of tools, but of people.
Tim said he was observantly concerned. He's not catastrophizing, but he is saying that in a historical context, things aren't great. His concern is certainly shared by leaders and experts across Europe. Last year, the head of NATO warned,
Russia could be ready to use military force against NATO within 5 years. 5 years. Let's not kid ourselves. We are all on the eastern flank now.
This matters because of something called Article 5. It's NATO's core principle, and it means that an armed attack against one member is considered an attack against them all. In other words, if a member country is attacked, the UK would be expected to respond.
We must be able to deter aggression. And yes, if necessary, we must be ready to fight, to do whatever it takes to protect our people, our values, and our way of life.
I mean, I don't know about you, but to me all of this sounds a little ominous.
If you could just introduce yourself and your title, please.
Yeah, I'm Ed Arnold. I'm a Senior Research Fellow for European Security at the Royal United Services Institute.
And I think we'll just jump right into the first question, which is, what is the current state of international security?
It's deteriorating, and it's deteriorating quite rapidly. At a macro level, what we're seeing is a transition from a US-dominated international system that was established at the end of the Second World War, but that is now deteriorating in a number of ways, and we're in a transition period to something that comes next. And there are other powers such as China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, who are sort of joining together to try and bring us into a world system that is heavily structured towards them. And I think what we're seeing within this deterioration is also a very powerful US president who is starting to use his military might, first against Venezuela, now against Iran, and it's just sucking up capacity, both in terms of military capacity, diplomatic capacity. So all of these areas now are linked between the European theatre, the Middle East, and also potential war with the US in the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, that's quite sobering. Sounds like there's a lot of, multiple actors at play, different regions around the world. I guess, how important is Scotland in all of this wider picture?
Well, Scotland's actually very important. So if we look into sort of the European theatre of operations, the primary threat is Russia. And the seat of Russian military power is up in the Kola Peninsula, directly in the Arctic Circle, and that's where their strategic nuclear forces are. And it's also where their Northern Fleet, so their Navy fleet, which is their premier. And that is effectively where their power lies. And in order to target Europe, in order to target the US, those capabilities have to come down through the Norwegian Sea into the North Atlantic and the North Sea to threaten Europe and also threaten the US. So Scotland is absolutely integral to that, mainly through RAF Lossiemouth in the north, which has UK maritime patrol capability. And actually that's quite a large proportion of NATO's maritime patrol activity.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to go back to that point. So in Europe, Scotland is the only place that has nuclear weapons that would be used in defence of NATO. Is that right?
Yes, so in the sort of the 2010s, the UK made that commitment to NATO to say that, our nuclear weapons, our nuclear forces are assigned to NATO. So we call that extended deterrence. So within NATO, the only powers are the US, UK and France that have nuclear weapons. The UK's are specifically assigned to NATO. There is a discussion in France at the moment, and President Macron made a fairly important speech in the last couple of weeks around that. And that's really important at the moment because of the fluctuating policy of the US. People are worried about Trump, and they're also worried about sort of US disengagement from Europe and deprioritization of Europe to look into other theatres. Obviously now Middle East is pretty critical. So Europeans, particularly if you're closer to the Russian border, they're really worried about this, and you see nuclear weapons as that ultimate deterrence factor. So the fact that UK has extended deterrence over them is really important.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that makes Scotland a target then?
So I think in a number of ways, and I think if you're looking at potential scenarios where NATO could be involved with a war against Russia, I mean, it could happen by accident. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of military activity going on, and sometimes there's miscalculation, there's unintended escalation. So this could happen by accident. But if it is deliberate policy, I mean, NATO is a defensive alliance. It's not going to go to war with Russia. It's only if it's attacked. So it was deliberate Kremlin policy to go to war with Europe. Well, you have to look at that maritime patrol capability, because effectively, if you're able to destroy or disable it, you can blind NATO. And if NATO can't find Russian submarines, then they are effectively very vulnerable.
Okay, so how prepared is the UK and Scotland for these kind of attacks?
Well, I think reasonably prepared, but again, this is about complacency. Like, you almost can't over prepare for these eventualities. And I think at a very high level that there is a slight misunderstanding here, because there's an issue. So defence is not a devolved competency to the Scottish government. So that power resides in Westminster and the Ministry of Defence. But when you're talking about resilience, that is sort of, it's where the seams and handoffs between departments happens. What's really important, if you're talking about the types of crises we are, that all of these things are ironed out, because you're effectively talking about legal, emergency powers. They need to go through acts of parliament to be able to enact it, so that when you need them, you can press the button and say, okay, we're going to do this. So I think at a very high level, the governance needs to be understood.
My last question, and it's quite a big question, is how likely is a nuclear attack in 2026?
Very unlikely, I would say. Just for the fact that if you separate out what is meant by a nuclear attack, I mean, you hear sort of tactical nuclear weapons. I don't use that terminology because I think nuclear use is never confined to the tactical level of warfare, but certainly low-yield nuclear weapons use. There has been worries that the Russians may use that in Ukraine at some point in time to try and break the deadlock, but assess certainly that this year is highly unlikely. And certainly nuclear use by Russia's allies and partners, notably China and India, have said that's absolutely a red line for us. I think it's really important to note that there are gradients of activity, and that's why deterrence activity is so important, to make sure that if you start to go up those escalation points in that ladder, there are measures to de-escalate as well.
For the past few weeks, my feed has been full of videos about nuclear Armageddon. But listening to Ed and Tim, it sounds like the current assessment is that we don't need to be heading for the bunkers anytime soon. I set out to understand if Faslane makes Scotland a target, and the answer is complicated. Major cities and infrastructure would be at risk in any large-scale conflicts, with or without nuclear weapons. The chances of a nuclear strike anywhere in the world remains very low. What was clear is that war can take a lot of shapes, and what really matters for Scotland and the UK is resilience, being prepared and being aware. And I know that's a big thought to leave you on. If you do want to go further, BBC journalists have produced extensive reporting on both UK security issues and major international security issues. I'll put links in the description of some of the stuff that I've been reading, but you can also find it all on YouTube or on the BBC News app. And I'd really like to hear what you think. Please share your thoughts on all of this in the comments. That's all from me. Thanks for watching.